All right. Take us in, sir.
All right, I think we are live. Frank Corva, White House correspondent, Bitcoin Magazine. Pleasure to have you once again here on weekly Bitcoin. We call it a weekly Bitcoin Laws update. What exactly are we?
Weekly Bitcoin legislation update, whatever's clever,
Yeah,
whatever works.
Still workshopping the name. It's been a big day. It's been a huge day, actually. So much so that I think we had an agenda, but I think I'm just gonna have to throw it out and we can kind of riff on it. For those folks tuning in, we've just cut away live from the stable coin legislation Genius Act vote in the House, which I don't know if it's been officially declared. It's passed. I can see on my display 307 ayes, 122 nays, and maybe 3 still to vote. So Genius Act has passed the House today. Clarity Act has passed the House today. Frank Corva is with us live from the White House. My name is Julian Fahrer, founder of Bitcoin Laws, and we're gonna talk about all of it right now, I guess, as well as the Tornado Cash trial and probably a few other things too. So why don't we just start with Frank? Welcome. You're coming at us live from the White House. What have you been up to today?
Yeah, so I'm here in the White House press room. Pardon me if I'm talking a little bit lower today. Just don't want to be too interruptive of the people around me. I don't know if interruptive is a word, but I just made it a word. Yes, just recently spoke with Karoline Leavitt, the White House press secretary, asked her about whether or not Trump wants all language regarding wanted all language regarding CBDCs taken out of the Genius Act, which I'm assuming he did. I think he met with representatives and senators about this, and pardon the background noise, there's some people, so just got to roll with it given the circumstances here at the White House. So yeah, I asked her about that and asked her about the de minimis tax exemptions, which President Trump talked about in this room. So $600, up to $600 in Bitcoin transactions. This was something that was initially going to be an amendment in the Big Beautiful Bill, or the One Big Beautiful Bill. The amendment didn't come to the floor in the vote, but I just wanted to know if it was still top of mind for the president, for Karoline Leavitt. And I know that she mentioned to me beforehand, she heard that I was coming, so she touched base with the AI and crypto czar David Sachs beforehand, when I gave her sort of some things that, I reached out and said, these are some things I'd like to talk about. She did a little homework on it. So it is still top of mind for the administration. I think we will see Bitcoin as money in terms of something being legally codified into law, a de minimis exemption for people who don't understand. So you don't have to pay a capital gains tax on any of the Bitcoin that you spend. You want to go buy your coffee or up to something, flat screen TV even in Bitcoin, you could just go spend it like it's money, something that I would really love to see happen. Obviously, a huge honor, a huge pleasure to be able to have the opportunity to ask the White House press secretary that. And I say this with all my heart. I don't want to sound like Dennis Porter or anything. No offense to Dennis Porter. I like the work he does, but like really on behalf of the Bitcoin community, I'm standing on the shoulders of giants. This is not something that happened overnight. There are many people that came before me. So it was a tremendous honor. And yeah, if you didn't catch the clip, I think there's lots of it being cut up and shared around social media right now.
Yeah, so we're going to talk about the issues for sure. I kind of actually just want to talk about what your experience was like.
Sure,
this is a huge moment for you, right? This is a not just for you, but obviously the Bitcoin community, as you mentioned,
yeah.
Bitcoin Magazine. You are, correct me if I'm wrong, you are the first White House correspondent from Bitcoin Magazine, right, to be in this.
This is correct. I think, yeah. I think there's a handful of other people. I know Sandra Lutz from Decrypt is also a correspondent. So Decrypt has their White House correspondent, but I don't, even Eleanor Terrett, an incredible journalist, she doesn't have a hard pass credential. So I think there's just 2 of us right now. So to say that that's an honor, or to be alive during this point in time when Bitcoin becomes a thing, and to be the person that speaks to, the White House about it, it's not something I've mentally processed by any stretch of the imagination. So yeah, it's a tremendous honor for sure.
Yeah, well, first of many to come. So take me, I mean, I guess this is a little bit inside baseball, but I'm curious. I'm sure some people watching might be too. So you knew that the press conference was going to be at, whatever it was, 1:30 Eastern today. When did you find out that you were going to be the first cab off the rank? First question.
1:21 p.m., 9 minutes beforehand. Right. Yeah. So
yeah. So that you were all ready to go. Had the questions sitting like right at the front. If I kind of gathered that correctly.
Yeah, so it was actually interesting. They have a specific new media seat. I could quickly show you. So it's the seat over there to the left. Yeah. So they have a new media seat. So I think, and I truly, honestly, I know that people have mixed feelings about this administration, or any administration for that matter, but this idea of how welcoming the administration has been to new media. I've been here for an interview with Secretary Lutnick and Bo Hines. They really do want new media here. And I will reiterate something I said with Secretary Lutnick and Bo Hines. There's no screening of questions. Even when I came back here, they asked me like, oh, what are some things you want to talk about, just so that she could do some background knowledge, but nobody asked me for questions. Nobody asked me for, it was not set up to be a certain thing. So I think that that's really something I have to give them tons of credit for. The only reason they even asked me for like, could you just give us a little bit of what you're interested in talking about, is because she said it to me beforehand. She's like, look, I'm not a crypto expert. Like we talked backstage. She's like, so I just needed to do a little homework. I touched base with, she spoke with our crypto czar, David Sachs, beforehand, just to get a little bit of a refresher on some of the topics. But yeah, other than that, there was no, we want you to say this and then we'll say this, blah, blah, blah. I chose to ask what I asked about CBDCs because obviously the Genius Act is kind of the big thing. And you have the likes of Marjorie Taylor Greene and Warren Davidson sort of holding it up. And then the de minimis exemption, it was Trump himself, President Trump in this room that said, I want to see a $600 de minimis exemption. So just felt like it was appropriate to ask being back in this room. So that was it.
Great. That's awesome. Huge moment, as we said. Also, this is not the only thing you've had going on this week, right? We'll get to the Clarity Act and the Genius Act votes that just happened. There's plenty of drama surrounding that too, but walk us through some of, I guess, what else you've been up to this week, namely being in New York for the Tornado Cash trial for the past couple of days.
In the spirit of sort of the atmosphere I'm in, we have somebody else reporting next to me. So could I ask a small favor, maybe a little bit of a synopsis on what's happening that you've been following this week, and then I'll come back in with Tornado Cash. Does that work for you?
Yeah, let's do
awesome.
It. Okay, perfect. So yeah, Frank, while you let someone else speak, in the White House press briefing room. So I guess we'll do a quick recap on what I have been up to today and what we've been following along with, which is the passage of both the Genius Act for stablecoin regulation and the Clarity Act for digital asset market structure. Both of those passing through the House. For a bit of additional context there, the Genius Act was a Senate bill, initially passed through the Senate a few weeks back. It has now passed through the House, meaning it's passed through both chambers, meaning it's ready to be enacted into law. And so President Trump, in fact, in Carolyn Levitt, in her answer to Frank about an hour ago, said that President Trump himself has prepared a signing ceremony. I think the word was ceremony used for the Genius Act for tomorrow. So that is clear, that is ready to go, and will be signed into law by the big man tomorrow. So the Clarity Act now heads to the Senate, so it has to clear through the Senate. And in fact, that is where, that's maybe a good jumping off point for some discussion that we'll get into. For those who've been following over the past 48 hours, there's been a bit of a holdup. Crypto Week has been a bit of a rocky couple of days, partly due to the challenges that this kind of package of bills, Clarity, Genius, and also the anti-CBDC bill, have been experiencing going through the House, getting to this final vote. In part, that has been because of how certain factions have felt about some issues, namely this CBDC issue. So we have the House Freedom Caucus, which is a select group of Republican congresspeople. They had objections to this kind of combined package of bills moved through the House at the same time. If we've been correctly led to believe, the reasoning being the lack of a robust enough, from their perspective, CBDC provision included in either Genius or Clarity. I think they may have wanted it to be in one or then the other, or both.
I think it was Genius. At least I asked about it with Genius. That was what I took from it, but I'm not.
I think that's right. But of course, a lot of these discussions are happening behind the scenes as well.
I will say one thing. One of the reasons that made me ask that question was actually Congressman Davidson, who posted something on X that actually made me do a little bit of research, that there was sort of a provision somewhere within Genius that would not, it wouldn't allow for a retail CBDC, but it would allow for the federal government to create a CBDC that they could sort of use internally, if I'm not mistaken, or that the Federal Reserve could use.
So I understand why there may have been a little bit of skepticism about how robust this provision in Genius is, because it's not really a standalone provision that kind of directly addresses this question of CBDCs. What it is a rule of construction, which is how to construe the legislation. So like you're reading this legislation, there are lots of different kinds of provisions in there. And there are these things called rules of constructions, which are just like little pointers to the reader saying, hey, just to be clear, this is what we're talking about in this section. That's a little bit technical, but all that is to say there is this rule of construction somewhere in the document that said, hey, just to be clear, you shouldn't construe, this act is to be construed to not allow the Federal Reserve to expand the scope of its services that it offers to the public. So it's not calling out CBDC by name. What it is it's a little disclaimer saying, hey, we just want to make it clear that we're not trying to enlarge the scope of the Fed's public offerings here. So if you read that for what it is, then you would say, yes, that should be inclusive of a retail offered CBDC. But it's not an explicit CBDC ban, right? Which HR 1919, I believe it is. That's the anti-CBDC bill that was also included with this package moving through at the same time. One of the things that has not been clear to me over the past 48 hours is this interplay. We have the anti-CBDC bill. We have the folks in the House Freedom Caucus who are not happy with the lack of a CBDC provision in Genius or Clarity or both. I think, Frank, from what I've been able to deduce, this has to do with the fact that we still have a bunch of work in the Senate to do. What I mean by that is the Genius Act is now law. That's great. But the CBDC bill and the Clarity Act have to go through the Senate. And the thinking here is the Clarity Act is a much better bet. This is bipartisan legislation that's been worked on for a very long time, and as it is, or was, or as it is, stands. The expectation is that this is going to move through the Senate without a whole great deal of controversy. On the other hand, we can't. We at this stage, I don't think we can quite say the same thing about the anti-CBDC bill. It doesn't quite have that same degree of support. So all of that is to say, right? Like what the TLDR is. The anti-CBDC bill might well fail in the Senate, and perhaps probably will if there's insufficient support. And so if that fails, then great. Then we don't have the robust anti-CBDC protection. And so I'm wrapping that all up in a bow. I think that's why there was this push to kind of get an additional CBDC bill in provision in at this stage. All of that is now kind of ancient history, I suppose, because both bills have moved through and both of them have passed through the House today.
Yeah, agreed. I was going to say some of this, it's kind of like water under the bridge at this point. Both of them have, but it is important to know that this conversation was had. I think partially because President Trump on the campaign trail talked a lot about the importance of his saying, we will not create a CBDC and all that. So I think it is worth sort of, in the spirit of promises made, promises kept, at least keeping an eye on whether or not he's kind of remaining true to his word, or whether or not our legislators are remaining true to that promise that that's not going to happen. So I think, we'll keep an eye on future bills or whatever, but the bills obviously are the way they are now, and we'll see what happens with these votes.
Yep.
Yes.
So I guess,
I was going to say another quick thing to touch on, only kind of in the spirit of the tile that we had for our handle. Another big thing, and I'll get into the Tornado Cash trial in a second. I think that's what we were just about to talk about before. It just quieted down, but your thoughts. I'm just kind of curious what you think. So some really good work from Lola Leets putting in a FOIA request, Freedom of Information Act request, to get the amount of Bitcoin that the U.S. Marshals are holding. Now, we don't know if that's all of the Bitcoin the U.S. government is holding, but there's a high likelihood that the U.S. government is just holding 29,000. And I say just because we were expecting upwards of 200,000, if not more. But I think some people, even I think Trump and his admin have said, it might be less than that. Maybe it's closer to 100,000 because of the amount that the Biden administration sold or whatever reason. But 29,000, I think, was far lower than most people were expecting. Shout out to Lola. I think it's great that she put that through. Shout out to David Bailey, who put out the $10,000 bounty in Bitcoin for the journalist who finally got the U.S. Marshals to disclose this information. I personally have emailed the U.S. Marshals on many occasions trying to get that information. I just didn't think to put through a Freedom of Information Act. But your thoughts on it? Where does this leave the U.S.? Does this sort of light a fire under, the likes of Bo Hines and Sachs to come up with these quote unquote budget neutral strategies to start getting some Bitcoin on the balance sheet?
Yeah, I think that's the key. That's the key phrase there, budget neutral, right? I guess for context, folks who are getting up to speed here, there is an intention that there's not a secret intention. Folks like Bo Hines have been expounding on this for the past few months. There is an intention to acquire Bitcoin by the federal government to be held by the federal government. We haven't had really any more specifics on that, despite the kind of repeated confirmation that, we really want to do this. The only thing we really know is that, as you said, this would have to be done in a budget neutral fashion, which itself is a term that's kind of a term of art. So what do we have here? Like, in a situation where the US government may have divested itself of a bunch of BTC, I don't really know if, is it budget neutral to get back to where we were? I'm not sure that might be kind of, expand, kind of a tenuous expansion of the definition there, just to merely kind of recover what was lost. I think so. A couple of things. One, I'd love to know, and I don't think it's going to happen unless we get some kind of whole of government approach here. We can, individual journalists can FOIA request every possible agency under the sun. That'll be kind of a laborious task, and then I guess folks can try to piece together whatever we get back from the IRS and the DOJ and Treasury and everybody else. What we really need is some kind of whole of government approach here, an actual holistic audit of the reserves.
If I had to guess, there's probably, with this information now being public, I would imagine that sooner than later, you'll hear an announcement from Bo Hines or David Sachs. I would say, just to get ahead of anything else sort of coming out with them, without them being the ones to issue that information to the public or to present that information to the public. That's how I'm thinking about it. I have no idea if they feel the same way or not, but we'll see.
I mean, I did see Senator Lummis comment on it. She said it was concerning to see these reports. I think it's the type of thing where, and this isn't news, right, to Senator Lummis or anybody else. I'm sure they know more of what's going on behind the scenes than the public does. But the fact that, as you said, some of it may be starting to come out in various forms, it is the kind of thing that could put some pressure on some more, some disclosure, some actual disclosure here. I would assume. Well, I don't think the IRS collects taxes in crypto assets. I don't think that's a thing. I'm not sure.
Not yet.
Not yet. So I'm not sure. The U.S. Marshals, we know, has had a years-long acquisition program, right? Because they have been confiscating property through criminal proceedings. I'm not, off the top of my head, I don't know of any other agency that would just have come into possession of BTC in the same way. So if you want to ask the question of how likely is it that this now is the full extent of the holdings, I would say there's a reasonable chance. I don't expect anybody other than the Marshals to be sitting on a stack of BTC. So.
I'm with you on that. But it does, one of the things that does sort of excite me is, I don't know, maybe this, because the number is so low, maybe this fast tracks the idea of something like a bit bond becoming a reality. Bit bonds, for those who don't know, governments issuing bonds where I think 90% would just be sort of normal, sort of standard practices. Money would go towards funding government, but 10% of that issuance would go towards Bitcoin acquisition by the government. So Andrew Hones has been really big on this. I think he and Matt Pines from the Bitcoin Policy Institute penned a paper on this. I can't share too much on it, but I know that there has been some developments behind the scenes of, Andrew having the ear of important people who, might consider this. I still think it's a little too exotic. We're not quite there. But who knows? It may be looked at as like, well, we want the United States to have more than we have. Russia has this. Well, I think we only know what China has, but we don't want to be too far behind in this sort of strategic reserve race if they're conceptualizing it like that. I know that, again, the likes of Bo Hines have talked about it publicly like that for sure. So we'll see what this does. I think it's going to be interesting to see what some of the rhetoric around this looks like at this point and what some of those strategies look like. I think there's just plenty of creative ideas out there for ways to, the budget neutral thing, again, I think that definition can be stretched and people can sort of interpret that as they see fit. But at the same time, I also think they have to be careful not to waste a ton of political capital on this. I don't say waste. I don't mean it like that. It's just not that this is not the most pressing issue to every American. So putting a ton of capital into this and using tax dollars to acquire Bitcoin, as much as I'm like a Bitcoin enthusiast or whatever, and think, to quote David Zell, that it's prudent for countries, corporations, people, everyone to have a little bit of Bitcoin. I still don't think that the average taxpayer should be footing the bill for this. So we'll see what happens.
Yeah, well, you raise an interesting question there, which is how much is left in the tank as far as progressing the agenda for Bitcoin and digital assets beyond clarity and genius. These have obviously been the two kind of headline pieces of legislation that the White House has been very supportive of, but not just the White House, right? Most of the industry lobbying effort is, almost all of it, right? Aside from Bitcoin, is going towards getting these through. So if and when that happens, what Genius is now done, once market structure is done, are there any, other than Senator Lummis's Bitcoin Act, there are a few other, bills floating around, but I'm not sure. What do you think of this? Are we kind of maybe towards the end of the or the kind of promises made and promises kept era of the Trump administration, at least for this cycle?
I hope not, is what I'll say. So at the Bitcoin Policy Summit, I spoke with Congressman Nick Begich, who actually introduced I think it's called a sister act or a very similar act to the Bitcoin Act in the House. Also a huge proponent, not only of the SBR, but Nick Begich, Congressman Begich, is a longtime Bitcoiner, bought his first Bitcoin on Mt. Gox in 2012. I think he bought 7 Bitcoin for $100. I may have said this on the show before, but I'll repeat it because it's kind of gangster. But he wants, I said to him, I asked him the same question: are we sort of potentially losing momentum here? Is the Bitcoin Act going to be a thing? He seemed to think yes. I mean, obviously, given his position, I don't think he's going to be bearish on the bill that he's a primary sponsor for in the House. So maybe he's just sort of, I don't know, wishful thinking, hopeful that things will happen. But, I think it'll be important to see. I think it'll be telling in a way as well, in that it's kind of, the U.S. government is very into the idea of stable coins. They need buyers of short-term debt and all this kind of stuff that's going to benefit the government. Market structure, I think there are some other benefits. Well, I won't say benefits, but broader sort of crypto industry. We know a lot of people from the industry supported the administration as Trump was running for president. So it's it makes sense that that's all happening. The Bitcoin Act is the big question for me, because Bitcoin is this thing that doesn't have we have David Bailey as our main lobbyist. And it's I love David, but it's this thing. It's who lobbies on behalf of a commodity, right? It's but then again, you have the miners that were there. I know the administration has been close with the likes of Fred Thiel from Marathon and the team at Riot and stuff like that. So we'll see. I just hope it is a priority. That's the act I care most about, except for, I'll say one thing about the Clarity Act. Section 110 of the Clarity Act has a provision from the Blockchain Regulatory Certainty Act. And that provision stipulates that any creators of non-custodial tech or purveyors of that tech do not need to have money license transmitter businesses. This also might be a really cool transition into the Tornado Cash case. So I'm really, because if you're creating any sort of tech where you need a money license transmitter business, it's going to gum things up so much for developers and just make things really difficult to put out there. And technically 2019 FinCEN guidance doesn't warrant. It doesn't say that you need a money transmitter, license if you're not touching the private keys to people's goods. And I think the last thing I want to see happen is something like crypto wallets, Bitcoin wallets. The people who are purveying those, it could very easily be argued that money laundering occurs using this tool, crypto wallet or something like that. And we don't want that to become an issue that has to then go to court and be litigated, and then have all developers stop wanting to do things like create wallets. It's a really slippery slope, and I'm glad to see that issue is in the Clarity Act. So while I have mixed feelings about the act in general, that's the one thing I'm really looking forward to seeing getting across the line, so that developers can feel a little bit more secure and that they're not going to be persecuted and or prosecuted.
Yeah, and it's worth underscoring as well for folks who may be a little bit more skeptical. Even let's say Bitcoiners who might be a little bit more skeptical about the virtues of the Clarity Act. If you're watching some of the debate today, you may get the impression from some Democrats opposed that this would be a kind of a gift to the crypto industry. And I mean, it's obviously they support it for a reason. It's helpful for industry participants for a number of different reasons. But even if you're a kind of a disinterested Bitcoiner sitting on the sidelines and that's just all you care about, as you said, the kind of BRCA provision of the Clarity Act is worth your support.
So I feel like I make this note each time, but you really, I think even if you're a hardcore Bitcoiner, you really have to sort of look at the Venn diagram of where what you want to see accomplished overlaps with the broader crypto industry. So instead of being dismissive of it, think about where it overlaps, work together. I'm going to give a shout out. I think we'll transition over to the Tornado Cash case, but I was in the courtroom this week with Jennifer Rosenthal of the DeFi Education Fund, and they wrote an amicus brief for these developers, and they cited the work that the Deputy Attorney General did in publishing the Blanche memo, which says that this administration is not going to go after open source devs and crypto mixers and things like that. It's great that we have a memo from the Deputy Attorney General, but we want to see this kind of stuff codified into law so that people can sort of, rest a bit easier at night if they're developing this technology.
Yep. Well, yeah, so that I think is the segue. How far should we rewind here? What about just a quick intro? What is the Tornado Cash case about?
Yeah, great question. Tornado Cash case. So there's a few things to know about it. One, so Tornado Cash takes place. Tornado Cash is a technology, smart contract technology that was deployed on Ethereum. So again, why is Bitcoin Magazine covering what happens on Ethereum? Well, because it affects all open source developers, including this case will set precedent for the Samurai case. And that has to do with Bitcoin. If you don't know that, you can Google my name and Samurai and you'll see a bunch of articles on this. Roman Storm, US versus Roman Storm is the case. Roman Storm is the US based developer. He's actually, I believe, he was born in Kazakhstan, lived in Russia for a while, came to the United States, but was like a model citizen type guy. Worked for Amazon for a little while. He lives out in Seattle. He met Vitalik Buterin in 2019 and said, "Hey, I'm really interested in Ethereum. I want to build on it. What needs to be focused on?" Vitalik said, "Privacy. We need to figure out privacy." So he built this technology that essentially it's a mixing service. You could put a certain amount of Ethereum through it, and when it comes out the other side, the blockchain, it's going to be very difficult to follow on the blockchain who sent that money in and what it turned into. So it anonymizes transactions. It's been, I'll be honest, it's been a bit unsettling to hear again and again, in the courtroom and also in doing my research on this. A lot of bad people ended up using it. The North Korean hackers, the Lazarus Group, used it to funnel the money from Axie Infinity, the hack that they did, which was $600 million worth of crypto. That's an issue. I'm not saying it's not. It is. Other people, they have people who were victims of pig butchering scams and other scams that have happened, financial scams where people were scammed and then their money got put through Tornado Cash, and now it made it harder for the authorities to find the people who were who perpetrated these crimes. So a lot of attention started coming to Tornado Cash when people who were committing crimes or fraudulent activity started using it. This isn't to say that everybody who was using Tornado Cash was committing crimes. Certain people were just, I know that Vitalik Buterin himself used it when he wanted to send money to Ukraine. He sent some Ethereum to Ukraine. He used Tornado Cash to mix the funds so that people didn't see his address or whatever. So he wanted to protect his identity. That's the high level overview. The judge in the case, Judge Failla, Failla, I'm going to pronounce the name, Failla, she's quite intense. They're pushing very, very hard. I think Jay Clayton, who is now, there's a better term than this, but the head of the SDNY. So the Southern District of New York is where this trial is taking place. Very intense place for litigation. Some of the sharpest lawyers in the country are there. This is where trials like Epstein happen and P. Diddy and like high profile stuff.
Trump himself was arraigned there or something. Yeah.
Potentially in the same room. We're in one of the bigger rooms in the building on the first floor. So yeah, exactly. So there's a lot that goes on here. The one thing that's kind of troubling is that she keeps pushing back every time he brings up the fact that good people use this for privacy protections. You know, the prosecution has been objecting. The judge is saying, like, I don't want to hear this. We're just focusing on the bad people that have used it. And the issue here is that I watched the whole jury selection process, and not a lot of people have any sort of background in tech. So you have to imagine that they're getting a 10-minute explainer of not only how Ethereum works, but then how a crypto mixer works is not enough. Like, all they're hearing is from victims who... Tornado Cash did not perpetrate any fraud on anyone, but people who did bad things use Tornado Cash. And I don't know how that's resonating with the jury. I know how the judge feels. I've attended status conference hearings. She's not a fan of Tornado Cash. Let me leave it at that. And they're doing everything they can to control the rhetoric coming out of this, to not make this a financial privacy case, but to make this something where someone created a technology that, okay, maybe they don't have control over it anymore, at least the actual tech, the smart contract. But they're also going to go hard, I think, on the front end. So he also operated the Tornado Cash website, Roman Storm, and I think that helped to facilitate upwards of like 90% of the transactions that did go through the decentralized portion of what he
and sorry
he
to
built.
jump in. Am I right?
Yeah.
Right? I don't know if it's one of your updates, but I think I must have seen it from you that the judge has kind of been insisting that, hey, like, I don't actually, kind of paraphrase here, obviously, but she doesn't want to focus on the kind of underlying technology. Really what she wanted to talk about was that front end, right? It's like that like what's happening with the website and how people are using it, right? So the kind of how Ethereum works and mixing works and everything else, it's like very secondary to what the judge is focused on.
Correct. That is correct. The focus is on the front end, Storm's involvement. I will say that the judge is familiar with another case on this matter. So there was 3 developers for Tornado Cash. You had Roman Storm, who's being tried in the Southern District. You have Roman Semenov. I mix these names up. Roman Semenov, who is a Russian national who is still on the run. He's wanted by the FBI. He's gone somewhere, probably back in Russia, but nobody knows. And what's really kind of unnerving, he's been liking my tweets lately, and I'm like, okay, yeah. It's like I don't know.
He's somewhere with internet access. Yeah,
exactly. And then the third one is Alexei Pertsev, who is a Dutch national who was already tried in Dutch court and got 64 months in prison for creating this technology. TLDR on what the judge said there was, I do not care that this was decentralized. If you deployed this knowing that bad people could potentially use it, you're going to jail. Like, that's that. I know that the judge here, Judge Failla, whatever it is familiar with that ruling. That ruling cannot technically affect anything that goes on here, but she did, I think it was her that brought it up in the status conference, that like we can't call it precedent because precedent has to happen in the United States. And I'm telling this to a lawyer. It's like, I'm not trying to talk down to you here, but I'm just trying to reiterate some of what I've heard in these conversations. So it doesn't look great. But the other thing that's kind of like, well, if you're going to pay attention to anything about that ruling, why did he get 64 months and you're trying Roman Storm for 45 years? So it's like there seems to be some nuance that's missing here.
Can you maybe summarize or talk to some of the arguments that folks have used to, in support of Roman Storm's defense? I know there have been some kind of amicus briefs filed from some think tanks, industry folks. And then even just the defense itself, like what, on the prosecution side, it's like bad technology used by bad people to do bad things. What if you can sum up on the defense's side, what are the arguments that are being advanced in his favor?
Yeah, no, they weren't. I was there for the opening statement from the defense and the prosecution. Defense was just like, look, we're entitled to financial privacy. And in their explanation of Ethereum, they literally opened in Ether. They showed whatever screenshots from etherscan.io saying like, this is what a block explorer is. And if we don't have a mixing service and we're using this to pay people, then everybody can see all the transactions that everybody else made. You can look at the person who has sent you money and get the history and all this. And they went through that. They were very clear. There was objections by the prosecution. I don't know if they were saying it was irrelevant or what they were saying. The judge did let the defense proceed, though. They're arguing that one of the big things the judge is pushing for is for the victims to come forward, the ones that reached out to Tornado Cash to say, like, hey, get this money back for us. And the fact that Roman Storm would either respond with, like, I can't, like, there's nothing I can do, or didn't respond or whatever. So she's trying to say that, like, he didn't do enough to stop this from happening. And this argument, there's been no actual evidence presented on this, but the prosecution is also saying he could have changed it. There's something he could have changed about this, but he chose not to say it. But nobody has offered evidence on that yet.
And so in this example, it would be the victim has had their funds stolen, like they've been hacked, and so then it's been put through the mixer, and then the kind of suggestion here is that Tornado Cash could have prevented this from happening. It's at that point that they could have stepped in.
Yep. That's that's where, I mean, I'll be honest with you, like, I'm not enough of a technologist to know that that's the case, but there was the ceremony that was done when Tornado Cash launched that actually Vitalik Buterin took part in. And pardon me if I get this wrong, but I think you burn the key to the smart contract so that it's no longer something that can be changed. And they did that with Vitalik Buterin when they launched everything for however many smart contract, or how many pools they launched, because it was like there was a 10 ETH pool and there was a USDC pool. It depended on, like, the amount of the crypto you were putting through and then the asset you were putting through. Yep. So there was all these other factors. If I had to guess, he didn't have control over it. If I had to guess, that's probably the case. And I'm not going to say it doesn't raise questions about the front end and all this other stuff that he was doing to maybe facilitate or bring attention to this stuff. I also didn't know this, but Dragonfly was one of the VCs the VC that was invested in this, and Dragonfly is a huge VC firm. So I kind of didn't, when you think about it like that, it did give me pause to think, like, okay, there's a lot of, like, money behind this as a business enterprise. Yes, he wasn't touching the keys. He was technically abiding by FinCEN guidance. But the reason I'm bringing this up is not to start saying that I agree with the judge or the prosecution. I'm just saying this is what they're harping on. Like, this was a business venture. This was a profitable thing for you. Sure, maybe technically you weren't touching the keys, but, like, you were making money on this, and that's what the prosecution has been going hard on. Like, you were getting very wealthy doing this. You didn't care that hundreds of millions of dollars of laundered money was going through this. You could have done something. Again, that part, really, they need to bring the evidence sooner than later when it comes to that argument. But yeah.
So bigger picture. You mentioned, hey, there are general privacy questions and other things going on here. What's your take? Like, other than Roman Storm's case and Ethereum and Tornado Cash, what do you think's at stake here? Like, why should people tune in and care about this?
I think, so for those who aren't familiar, in the 1990s, there was a legal battle over what's now termed pretty good privacy, PGP. So if you look up Phil Zimmerman and the PGP fight of the 90s, this was about people using encryption on the internet to send information, to send messages. This was before, obviously, the transfer of value on the internet. This is mid-90s, so there's no, like, Amazon yet or anything like that, but there was definitely no, like, internet native money. Anything that did exist as a precursor to Bitcoin, there was some analog form behind the scenes and then some digital representation of that analog form. Like, for example, there was BitGold, and BitGold was something where someone was holding the gold and then you transferred the tokens back and forth or whatever. So we weren't, this is 13 years before Bitcoin gets introduced, or 14 years. So that being said, what's at stake here is, like, what we're watching now 30 years later is the fight over how much privacy you have when transferring value across the internet. So the fight was initially over how much privacy you have when transferring messages or information over the internet. And for context there, we wouldn't have things like Signal or other messaging apps where texts are encrypted if it wasn't for these, wars having been won. But the other thing that people don't recognize is that if the PGP wars didn't break the way that they did, we wouldn't have, like, online trading, like Fidelity. All that information has to be encrypted. The government was saying that this encrypted encryption is a munition. And the PGP wars, they argued that it was free speech, and they won that case by printing the text on the back, printing the code on the back of a T-shirt and saying, like, look, it's free speech.
Was Adam Back involved with that somehow?
He was involved with that group of people. Like, he was one of those early cypherpunks. Yeah, I don't know if he was.
I think I may have seen him post recently. He's got one of these one of these T-shirts hanging around. It's
Cool.
As you say, it's like a piece of code printed on a T-shirt, and it's like there's a caption that says, "This is a weapon."
Yeah.
And so then it's kind of a like a cypherpunk flex to like walk through airport security with that T-shirt.
Yeah, interesting. So yeah, I mean, now what we're at is like the discussion is now, are we going to be allowed to transfer value on the internet with a notable degree of privacy? I mean, granted, blockchains are pseudonymous. It's not like it says like Frank sent this to Julian when I send an Ethereum transaction, but it also doesn't take like a super rocket scientist or technologist to sort of do a little bit of research, maybe connect an IP address to the address, or see maybe that if I'm using Ethereum for the sake of the argument here, because that's what Tornado Cash is. If I bought the Ethereum on Coinbase, put it in a wallet, obviously it's very easy to track something like that and attach my identity to it. So we're moving into a world where, can we send this information without our identities attached to it? And it's obviously good technology, because from what I understand, they were not able to catch the people who perpetrated these frauds. Like the victims that have come to talk about these frauds, it's not like they found the people. Like, it's good technology, but to just to explain to people who are thinking, well, do we really need that? It's like, my answer to that is yes. Like, I just saw a text from a friend of mine. She was Alexei Navalny's CFO, Anna Chekovich, and she, when the first crackdown started happening with Samurai in this case, she said, like, we use these tools. We need these tools, because when our donors donate to pro-democracy movement in Russia, to the pro-democracy movement, to Alexei Navalny's anti-corruption foundation, whatever, they can't be tied to that. They need to put that through an anonymizing tool. So, there's people on the other side who are fighting for democracy, fighting against authoritarianism, who are using these tools because they don't have any other tools to transfer value. These are people who can't even use bank accounts. Forget about having their money tracked. The bank accounts will be frozen immediately. So that's what's at stake. On one side, we have the people who truly need this, like the activists. On the other side, we have the bad actors. In the middle, we have other people who are just a bit more privacy conscious when transferring value across the internet.
Yeah. It's not just a niche issue. I think it really gets to the bedrock principles of like what a liberal democracy is, which is it's a form of government that protects minorities' rights. Like this is like a foundational minority rights issue, in the sense that you need to be alive to the possibility of people other than your in-group, other than the majority, who may not be ever present in daily life, but their rights have to be kind of respected and accounted for. And it's not easy, right? This is, as you say, if you live in a country like America, the idea that you would have your bank accounts frozen, that you would not be able to transact freely, it's kind of, it's not entirely hypothetical, but for most people, most of the time, it is. And so whenever there's a kind of moral panic, or even something approaching that, right, with a high-profile case, terrible things have happened. In this case, as you said, there are innocent victims who the Tornado Cash technology was used to steal from and to harm. But this is always the challenge: is like, how do you respond to that? And you can either continue to respect the rights of people in these kind of edge cases, or you can chip away at them and erode them over time. And so whether it's privacy on the internet or any other kind of liability for any manufacturer of technology, like if this kind of scope creep continues, where you're going to be responsible for whatever you put out into the world used by a third party who's not you, it doesn't require a ton of imagination to think about where that could possibly extend to. So super important case. And yeah, appreciate your work, and it's still ongoing. We should say you've been pulled away midweek to get to the White House. But
I want to take a second. I know there's been a lot of people from around the world, developers especially, who have reached out to me to thank me for covering this. And I just wanted to say, like, it's not like I'm just sitting around like sipping martinis because I didn't feel like showing up anymore. I'm here talking about Bitcoin has money in the White House. So it's like, this is, in my mind, this is like the only thing sort of worthy of taking me away from that kind of stuff. It really is. It's really, really important what's going on there. I'll give a shout out here. If you follow, I can't think of the reporter's name, but DL News is doing a good job covering this. A woman named Cheyenne from CoinDesk is doing a great job covering this. So can't think of her name offhand, but Google her. Zach Morris, wow, Saved by the Bell. David Z. Morris, ex-CoinDesk, ex-Fortune reporter who reports for the Rage.
We have lost Frank. This actually happened last week too. This is the perils of doing these things live. We are operating on Google Meeting here, and our time right now. So I'm going to get Frank back in a moment to just wrap up, and we will say our goodbyes. And we're going to get better at timing this for sure. Add Google Meeting. Let's do it. So while we wait for Frank, yeah, huge day again. Genius Act passed. That'll be signed tomorrow by Trump. We have the Clarity Act now heading to the Senate. We have the anti-CBDC bill also heading to the Senate, I believe. I think that, I'm not sure if that vote has actually happened, or maybe it happened while we were talking. Certainly Genius and Clarity. And then, okay, I think let's see, we're back. I think we are back.
Sorry about that, guys. I'm not sure what that was. It just cut out. I'm not sure what the deal was.
You know what it was?
Yeah.
It was the classic Google Meet conundrum.
Oh,
being not wanting to pay any more money to than I absolutely have to. So we got kicked. But I was just giving a bit of a wrap up. Just I guess that we kind of covered Tornado Cash pretty deeply there. I'm not sure if anything else. Yeah.
Quick thing, I was in the middle of saying it, but yeah, so DL News, CoinDesk, The Rage, I'm going to be covering it as much as possible, but generally speaking, I know that people are just interested in having this information, and I'm not trying to say like, obviously, please follow me in what I'm doing with Bitcoin Magazine. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that, but like there are other people that are in the courtroom. Be sure to check it out. And I think other outlets, as things get probably closer to wrapping up, you'll probably see the likes of Mackenzie Sagalos, MSNBC. The word is sort of out there that it's happening right now. I mean, it's a very slow process. It's a very like slow moving sort of thing. I don't know if anyone's ever been to court before, but just it's a slow moving thing. But I will say that, from what I've seen, I've spoken with Roman Storm's lawyers. They're grateful. I think he actually hit his goal of raising $2 million for his legal fight. And I think at the end of the day, and there's one thing I wanted to say. I'm not going to say I'm just sitting there in the back cheerleading like he's free. I think it is really important that we do consider that bad people are going to use this technology. I'm not saying that we should, put the kibosh on the technology for that reason, but I don't know if there'll be some way to mitigate that or work around. I'm just trying to keep an open mind, saying like, I'm not here saying, yes, North Korean hackers should launder 600, that there's national security threats there. There's a lot that goes into that. So I'm just saying, at the same time, we need to take into consideration that at the very base layer here, it is just a tool, that he didn't commit any specific crime. He wasn't defrauding people himself. Yes, he made a tool that made it a bit easier for people to do this. But I would just say to people sort of, if you feel sort of very, very strongly, like I have certain people reaching out to me saying like, this dude is a criminal, why are you covering this and that? I would just say, keep your mind open. It's an important case, and it'll set some pretty important precedent. So, but I wanted to ask you a question too. Is there anything big on the state level that we missed this week? Because there's so much happening, it's just hard to keep up with.
Not a ton on the state level. I think things are slowing down statewide. A lot of sessions have wrapped up through early summer. A couple of bills are still moving in California. We have their state payments bill, through which the state of California, this bill would allow the state agencies to accept fees and payments in the form of digital assets. Of course, up until I think last week or the week before, this would have included Bitcoin. But then at the committee level, it was actually amended to just kind of only include stablecoins.
I remember that.
So that was a little bit unfortunate. But nonetheless, that bill is progressing, as is a couple of other. There's unclaimed property laws and some kind of civil asset forfeiture stuff. But and then a couple of other things. I think Pennsylvania introduced a bill for a regulatory sandbox program during the week too. So bits and pieces, but certainly on the SPR front, things have quieted down. I think North Carolina have a couple of SPRs live, but I believe their session is imminently wrapping up, and they're not very far progressed. So I don't think they're going to make it. Michigan still has SPR bills live. I think Michigan actually will run through to the end of the year. Maybe it might be one of the few states that's going to do that. Same with Massachusetts, and I think that might be it as far as the SBRs on deck. So yeah, that's
Appreciate
kind of the state of play.
Appreciate that overview. I have not had the headspace to be in the weeds with any of that stuff this week. I've also the really hard part, I'll be honest, about being in trial every day is I don't have my phone or computer with me. So I'm just sitting there for 8 hours,
just
while
listening
the media
to lawyers just read through dockets and clerks and
it's
dry.
heavy. It's heavy. Yeah.
Well, thank you again for your great work, though, Frank. You're knocking it out of the park. You're crushing it in more ways than one.
I appreciate it, sir.
Including
Likewise.
just ducking down to DC when you get the tap on the shoulder.
Yeah.
So it's all very exciting. Congrats again on that. And then I guess we'll stay tuned. We'll most likely be back here next time with probably a lot more to talk about.
That's it. Well, I want to say thank you to you, for everyone who's watching. Julian does all the background. He gets this all set up, deals with all the technical issues and everything else. Makes it easy for me to come on here and do this. So, follow this man. Pay attention to what this man's doing. Appreciate it. Always a pleasure catching up with you each week, Julian. We'll do it again next week.
Thanks, brother. Chat soon.
All right. Take it easy.